Okay, let's jump right into this explainer. We're looking at a truly fascinating era of European history today. We often think total control is the ultimate recipe for lasting success, whether you're running a business or an entire empire. But as we unpack the age of absolutism, we're going to see how history has a funny way of completely flipping the script on rulers who try to hold on to absolutely everything. We'll be breaking down this whole story into 5 quick chapters. We'll start with the rise of absolutism. Look at Spain's absolute power, see how the Spanish Empire weakens, watch the Dutch break away, and finally wrap up with the Dutch Golden Age.
So, let's kick things off with Chapter 1, The Rise of Absolutism.
To really grasp how absolute power shaped Europe, we have to put ourselves in the shoes of the people living through the 1500s and 1600s. This was an era defined by just intense fear and uncertainty, heavily fueled by massive, endless religious and territorial conflicts tearing across the continent. And think about it. Even today, when people are deeply afraid or uncertain, they usually look for a strongman to step in and restore order. Well, Europe's monarchs were more than happy to take on that job. Now, you can really see a vicious cycle playing out here. Constant fear meant you needed much bigger armies. But to pay for those massive armies, rulers had to slap cripplingly high taxes on everyday people. Predictably, those heavy taxes sparked widespread unrest and peasant revolts. And then, rulers turned right around and used that very unrest as the ultimate excuse to seize even more power. They basically said, hey, I need total control to protect you from all this chaos. Which brings us to the absolute monarch, a king or queen with complete control over the government and the lives of the people. But why on earth did people actually accept this? Well, it comes down to a concept called divine right. These monarchs genuinely believed they operated on a completely different plane of authority, answering directly to God. They felt totally free from any limitations from the nobility, the government, or even the law itself. To question the monarch was literally to question God. No way around it. And a lot of these monarchs essentially used Niccolò Machiavelli's famous book, The Prince, as their personal playbook. The core theory was ruthlessly simple. A wise ruler does whatever is necessary to stay in power. Right and wrong took a back seat to maintaining strict control and unquestionable authority. All right, moving on to Chapter 2, Spain's absolute power. The stage for all of this was really set back in 1556. That's when Charles V made the huge decision to step down and divide up his massive territories. He gave Austria and the Holy Roman Empire to his brother, but he handed the absolute jackpot, Spain and its incredibly lucrative colonies, to his son Philip II. So Philip inherits this position of just unimaginable power, and he completely leans into it, tightening his grip on Spain and heavily dictating his subjects' lives. But he didn't just sit on his inheritance. He aggressively expanded it. When his uncle, the King of Portugal, died without an heir, Philip just stepped in and took control, just like that. And with that one move, Spain inherited all of Portugal's vast global territories across Africa, India, and the East Indies. Practically overnight, Philip's domain transformed into a true global superpower, absolutely dripping in colonial wealth. All that immense wealth flowing into Spain funded a massive cultural and artistic golden age. This whole era was deeply rooted in the strict Catholic faith that Philip used to justify his absolute rule. The dramatic, almost stormy artwork of painters like El Greco perfectly captures that intense religious fervor characterizing Spain during its absolute peak. But as we'll see in Chapter 3, having all the money in the world isn't always a good thing. Let's look at how the Spanish Empire weakens. You would totally think that literal rivers of gold and silver flowing in from the Americas would make Spain completely invincible, right? But ironically, this sudden, massive influx of wealth caused some serious, self-inflicted economic wounds that would ultimately bring the entire empire to its knees. It was basically a devastating trio of problems. First off, the massive flood of silver caused its market value to totally plummet, which sent the prices of everyday goods skyrocketing through inflation. Second, they had this incredibly unfair tax system that exclusively burdened the lower classes, keeping the poor from ever building wealth or starting businesses. And third, a staggering amount of foreign debt accumulated by the crown. Because prices inside Spain were so incredibly high, Spaniards just took their wealth and bought much cheaper goods from foreign countries instead. Plus, to finance his constant wars, including a disastrously failed invasion of England in 1588, Philip had to borrow heavily from foreign banks. It's a classic economic lesson. Spain's absolute obsession with war meant their immense colonial wealth literally just flowed right out of the country, actively enriching their geopolitical rivals. All that severe economic mismanagement pushes us right into Chapter 4, the Dutch breakaway. So let's see how all this frustration actually boils over into outright rebellion. Philip's heavy-handed absolutism is exactly what caused him to lose some of his most vital territories. He tried to aggressively crush Protestantism in the Spanish Netherlands while simultaneously slapping them with huge taxes to fund his Spanish wars. He just pushed them too far. 7 Protestant provinces rose up in fierce protest, and by 1579 they officially declared their independence from Spain. The empire geographically fractured right down the middle. Those 7 northern provinces broke away to form the independent, united provinces of the Netherlands. Meanwhile, the 10 Catholic southern provinces, which is basically present-day Belgium, stayed under Spanish control. This split was an absolutely massive blow to Spain's dominance in Europe. Which brings us to our final chapter, Section 5, the Dutch Golden Age. The contrast between these two after the split is just striking. While Spain stubbornly clung to a rigid, absolute monarchy, the Dutch completely flipped the script. They thrived by setting up an independent republic, they allowed each province to elect a leader, and most crucially, they practiced widespread religious tolerance, letting people worship however they wanted. Because they weren't wasting all their resources fighting religious wars or trying to micromanage every detail of their citizens' lives, the Dutch focused all their energy on commerce, and it paid off big time. They built a massive global trading empire. Their merchants quickly became the most important bankers in all of Europe, and the legendary Dutch East India Company completely dominated the insanely lucrative spice trade and Indian Ocean commerce. To really wrap your head around their staggering dominance in trade, just consider this one number: 4,800. At the very height of their power, the Dutch boasted a fleet of 4,800 ships. That made it the absolute largest fleet of merchant ships in the entire world, completely dwarfing the fleets of much larger, older nations. These formidable ships sailed all across the globe, building an absolute economic powerhouse. They're physical proof that a tolerant, commercially focused, and decentralized republic could vastly outperform a rigid, tax-heavy absolute monarchy on the global stage. And that brings us to the end of our explainer, leaving us with a really powerful idea to think about. We watch Spain try to grip the world in an iron fist, only to watch its wealth slip right through its fingers into the hands of a small, tolerant republic. So, does trying to control everything absolutely, as Philip II did, actually guarantee that you will eventually lose it all? It's a fascinating lesson from history, and for sure, one well worth remembering.